I need to learn how to pronounce the name, so but thanks a lot for the introduction. Although frankly I don't understand what you were saying. So, but I can understand the slide.
Yeah.
So, well, I'll try to pick up the language as I come here more. So yeah, so I think in the room here, I understand some of you are already .NET developers.
Yeah.
So who are the, is everybody here .NET developers? Everybody in the room .NET developers? Or some of you are not .NET developers? Okay, so anyway, I don't speak Vietnamese, so I use English. I hope that you'll be able to understand what I'm trying to explain today. I'll try to go slowly, alright? And if you have any questions, feel free to ask. And also, before the session today, your dear host has already given me a list of questions that some of you guys have requested. So later on in the session, I'll try to address those questions as I get to that. So today, just a very quick introduction about myself. I am a .NET developer by training, but I'm full stack. Full stack meaning I do everything from mobile, desktop, web, you name it. I've done every single level, low level, high level coding. Personally, I also do consulting in UX, user experience. I'm a generalist, jack of all trades. So if there's something that you need advice on, if it's not Python, if it's not Ruby, I should be able to answer. So that's what I cover. Currently, I'm working for Progress Tailoring. So I'm also a tailoring MVP and I'm also a evangelist for tailoring. So anything to do with tailoring, you can ask me if you're interested. We'll take it offline because if we go into it, I think I can spend the next 3 days talking about tailoring. So let's get into the topic proper. I'm just going to sit down because I need to click the slides. Let me try this works. Okay. Very nice. Okay, so basically today what we're going to talk about is we're going to do a basic introduction to ASP.NET MVC 6 and ASP.NET 5. So I'm just going to talk about the topic in general. I'm going to go through some of the new features and what is upcoming, because that is one of the points that your host has actually put in the questions. That's something I remember. So I'll try to talk about what are the upcoming trends for ASP.NET 5, especially now we know that we have the .NET Core. It's already open source. You can run it on Mac and Linux and all that. So really the possibility for .NET developers is limitless. So I'm going to talk about some of the key concepts of SignalR. Okay, basically what SignalR is. Quick look into SignalR itself. And because SignalR is such, although it's a very nicely wrapped framework for .NET developers, it's still quite, in terms of breadth, there's a lot to cover. So I obviously won't be able to cover everything today. So what I'm going to do is, when I come to that, I'll just flash the website for ASP.NET, and we'll just go through some of the topics that they have there. And then I'll end off with I'll proceed with the SignalR demo, deep dive demo. One thing to note is that because ASP.NET MVC 6 is still an ongoing project, ongoing development, it's not perfect. Just yesterday, Visual Studio notification, I received the ASP.NET Tools update for Visual Studio 2003. So as a .NET developer, I'm very curious. I went to click install. The thing with new technology is it's ongoing and they are progressing. So for some reason, my ASP.NET MVC 6 cannot compile. When I compile, the compiler is compiling. After half an hour, still compiling. So obviously something was wrong with the recent update. So for the demo later, I would actually be running on MVC 5 instead, because MVC 6 due to update, the patch has some issues. Okay, so finally at the end, I'll answer your questions if you have any. And if I'm unable to answer your questions because there's just so much knowledge out there, what I will do is I will actually do some research on it, and I will actually post my answers to your questions on my personal blog itself. So I'll share my blog with you guys later. So one thing that I love about .NET is in the past, as a .NET developer, the only platform you can use .NET is Windows. Right? So, and then a lot of people that wanted to learn .NET were deterred to learn. They thought that because Microsoft itself, you have to pay for the license, Visual Studio you have to pay for the license, it's kind of a costly thing for developers, because as a programmer, I used to be a programmer, and programmers, you don't get paid enough. Right? So it's always a problem when we think about having to spend money on something in order to learn the language. So when now they decided that the ASP.NET 5, the ASP.NET Core, they're going to put it, basically it's called VNext. You guys should know VNext. So the VNext project basically means that now you can have your Visual Studio code running on your Mac environment. And I've also personally tried it. It's really nice, really fast, very lightweight. Okay, so one other thing that you need to remember to take note is that with ASP.NET 5, web forms is not going to be around anymore. So if your company or your projects that are still running on web forms and you need to upgrade your server, your framework, these are the things that you should take note about to keep in mind when you're actually working on the project architecture. Also, the next thing is, I do not know why there's no more Visual Basic. I don't know, I started from Visual Basic, so that was like 2002. But I guess there are slowly more C# developers than Visual Basic developers. So there's no timeline. I tried searching online. I can't find anything that says when it will not be available anymore, but I'll keep track of that and I'll share the information when I actually have it. So in ASP.NET MVC 6, now we actually have feature called tag helpers. It's actually, previously when we were in the MVC 3, 4, 5, we were all using MVC helpers itself. So, but the tag helpers basically is better because it allows you to manipulate the HTML text. Okay, we also have the view components. We have the MVC controller itself, as well as AngularJS. So AngularJS is the support that now Visual Studio, or rather the .NET team, wants to build into the ASP.NET 5, because AngularJS 2 right now, or 1.3, is already widely used in the JS development community. And it's one of the very good ways for you to work on your model view model. You actually want to employ that methodology for how you want to present, how you want to manage your model, your data, as well as everyone. Okay, so SignalR, in my opinion, the thing is, SignalR has been around for about 3-4 years, but yet on the market, there's not a lot of developers using it, not a lot of companies using it. The understanding that I get as an MVP when I talk to developers, why are they not using SignalR? What was the challenge? A lot of them just think that it's either lack of understanding of why it's really useful. Number two, because for example, I'm sure that in certain countries, and I have 3G, so I got the data SIM card. I think in some places, depending on the level of technology available, the network and all that, sometimes there are certain limitations. So when we talk about user experience, sometimes if you go to a particular place and you have a very heavy web page that you want to load, and the bandwidth is very low, very little, very limited. So then your website itself takes a long time to update information and all that. So if every time you have to do a long polling means you click and then you have to wait for the information to come back from the server, then the user experience for your web page basically sucks. And nobody wants to come. Nobody wants to use it. So by using SignalR, it improves the update capability. For example, if one person decides that he wants to like a post That's how Facebook works now. You like a post and somebody else immediately sees a notification. So that is actually a two-way communication. Okay, so basically SignalR is advocating the real-time data communication between UIs. That's my version of understanding of what SignalR is, the value of SignalR. So a few of the key concepts that I will look into is, for example, the remote procedural call. So in SignalR, remote procedural call would actually be, for example, you can actually, from the server, call the client function on the browser and actually run a method to refresh the UI. That's in a nutshell what it does. Also, we have the WebSocket wrapper. Technically speaking, if you want to build an application around WebSockets.io, you can do that. I think that was one of the questions we gave me in Facebook. So yes, you can build your application around WebSocket.io itself, but then you will have to write a lot of the other coding to keep up with the falling back in the transporting, because there are times when there might not be WebSocket available, so you have to go all the way back down to HTTP. And obviously HTTP is the much slower cousin of WebSocket, and WebSocket is actually much, in terms of memory usage on the server, WebSocket is uses less memory. So basically the next concept that we talk about is basically the transports as well as the fallbacks. So the fallbacks would be, for example, I'll go into that later. So another key concept is actually what we call server pushing. So SignalR actually supports server pushing functionality, which your server code can call out to the client code in the browser using your RPC, rather than your request response model, which we have already been using right now. So request response means you click and then you wait. Okay, so when we look at transports, we have the HTML5 transports. Put it simply, basically we are looking at your WebSockets. As much as possible, in my opinion, I would try to use the WebSocket method as much as possible. But in the event that you are working on a project for a client and you understand that the client is running the application or the website on a very limited network, then you might want to immediately work on the forever frame, but that's only for IE, or you can use the AJAX non-loading. So those are HTML. So, and then we also have the server-side events. Okay, so I always like to show codes, and I like to put the codes very big. So for transports, basically one of the things that you can do is you can actually do logging. So in your browser, for example, Chrome, or whether you're using Firefox, you can enable the logging in your code and actually view it through your console window in your web browser when you're actually building your application and when you're actually doing testing using SignalR. So basically what I talked about earlier, if you know your client's capability, you can specify straight away what type of transport you want to use. But if you do not know, sometimes we are in a case where we really do not know whether or not there is going to be a problem. Maybe a particular, okay, I built an application running on the server, but I have multiple clients. Maybe he's very fast, he's very slow. So how then do I cater? So when you have something to fall back on, what it detects is that if this person is fast, I'll use WebSocket. If this person is slow, I'll use non-polling. So that is actually the way that it goes about for the transport. These are the four different kind of constants or constants that you can use to specify what sort of transport method you want to use. So you have WebSockets, frame, server-side events, non-polling. So of course, then the next thing that is very, very important in SignalR is having the hubs in connection, because these are the ones that they are like the routing, the controller. Okay, so you can have the persistent connection, which is, if I remember correctly, it is the older version. And what we want now is we want to encourage developers to use HAT because this is actually a wrapper that makes everything simplified. In layman terms, simplified for you to actually manipulate the routing of messages or the routing of information between the clients to the server. And also with the HAT, you can actually call the method on the server from your client itself. Okay, and there's actually, if you're familiar with .NET remoting, I used to do .NET remoting in a long time ago, maybe 2006, 2007. So that was a very long time ago. There was a case where we had a project that we needed to implement .NET remoting. So in my opinion, I think there is also a way of like personal preference as a developer. Which method do you want to use the most? Personally, if I'm very familiar with .NET remoting, I feel comfortable, I will actually just use the HAT method. So how the HAT work is very simple. It's only a few steps actually. So the server side calls a method of client. Okay, the packet is being sent across. You need to specify the method that you want to activate or invoke on the client side and the parameters. So the parameters could be passing an object. So for example, if I have a green field, info field, and I want to add a record, for example. So after I add a record, I pass the object back to the server to update. And then when you pass the information back, everybody else that is viewing will be able to see this object, this record has been updated. So that's the use case for that. Or if you're trying to do a chat group, for example, a chat group, it might not be an object, it might be a string, a message that you want to send. So the message is part of the parameters that you'll be using. Okay, so one thing to note is that if the parameter is an object, it will be automatically serialized as JSON. So you don't have to worry about passing. And then of course on the client side, you will check to see that the method exists in the client side body, JavaScript. And if it exists, then it will execute using the deserialized parameter data. Any questions so far before I continue? I'm just going and going. Really good? Okay.
Lát nữa là hỏi một thầy.
Back to the previous slide.
Sure.
I don't understand the position information.
Okay, so I think I wrote some notes down. Let me have a look.
Mọi người thấy bạn nào không hiểu, mọi người có thể break luôn.
Break luôn à?
Sorry.
No.
So, what I'm gonna do is
Chỉ sợ là đang là hỏi nhiều cái, tức là bị trễ thôi. Không thật.
a lot of times I still Google a lot to find out information. So for one, I'm not afraid to admit that I don't know everything. So there are times when I still refer to the notes online. I'm more of a practical developer. I'm a coder, so I'm not always into the theory aspect of things. But we will take a look at the question. Okay, so basically when we talk about persistent connection, we give the developer direct access to a low-level communication protocol that SignalR exposes. So this is actually the former way that we used to do when we work with Windows Communication Foundation. Okay, so this is really the low-level connection that you want to set for broadcasting messages. So the whole idea why we created SignalR is because we wanted to wrap it. It makes it easier for you to actually do your calls. So that's the reason for using SignalR. So I think at the end of the day, as a developer, it's really a choice of preference depending on what you prefer to use. So these are actually just two different ways. that you want to do. So, okay. Okay, so this is the part where I answer your question. When do you use persistent connection? So, okay, you use persistent connection when the format of your actual message sent need to be specific. So, for example, if I'm talking about sending a message, maybe I'm sending a string, I'm sending an integer, you need something that is strongly typed. So, you know the exact format. Sometimes the message format might not be in JSON. We're talking about object where you want to serialize to XML. Okay, so this is where you can use persistent connection. And like I mentioned, it's actually a thing of preference. So as a developer, you prefer to work with a messaging dispatching model rather than the remote invocation method. So the invocation model is where a client-side calls the server-side method, server-side calls the client-side method. Okay, so that's the difference. Okay, and also you might have an existing application or project that is already using the messaging model. It's being ported to use. So you are trying to transit that to using SignalR. So this is actually one method that you can use, or one use case for you to use. Okay, so getting started. Okay, to run the NuGet package. So for the demo itself, I will try to sit down and explain. So I hope that the people behind me will be able to hear me as well. I know it's a bit small, so pardon me. Okay, so what I've done here is I've created a very simple backbone project using the, I'm actually using Telerik right now here, using Telerik's MVC and Kendo UI project template to create a standard project. So it's blank, there's nothing. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start to put in the SignalR. I'm just going to copy and paste a lot of the codings. Give me a moment. A side note for this session, because previously I had intentions to go into the actual demo of the new features of ASP.NET MVC 6, but as I mentioned earlier, because of the recent patch, so I will skip that part for now, and I'll probably try to fit that in if I have the next chance to come back and speak again. So. Okay, so the very first step you need to do is to be able to install your package. So the latest version for SignalR right now is 2.2. Okay. So let's go to the So everything that we see here, we can just copy and paste. First step, and then after that, so we have that done for the startup. So what I'm going to do is loader. I've already prepared the sample beforehand, so I'm just going to do a lot of copy and paste. Prepare. So we can use the sample. All set. So that's sorry about the slight cut in the equipment. Yeah, I think there was some issue with the updates. So I'm just going to play cheat. I'm just going to show you what I've already completed beforehand. So it's much easier to explain. Okay, so basically I've already created a very simple example with SignalR using Hub and the product. So you can actually, okay, so when you look at, maybe we change the theme. Okay, so basically for the hub, this is where you do all your CRUD functionalities for managing your product updates and then sending that information to the clients that will actually receive it. I'm a bit disappointed that I can't seem to get it to run today, so I can't really show you what's going on and it in motion. But later on, there is a website for our Telerik site. We have a demo page where there are some samples that have similar ideas, so you can actually take a look at it and you know what is actually going on as well. Okay, so for this, it's very simple. You just have to, when you create a product model for handling the transfer of information for a particular module, you just have to specify it as the, maybe for example, if you have category, the category hub. Okay, so you just need to inherit the hub class, and then sorry, and then you will have the product services. This is the product services for your models. So it's just basically what you do for your, when you actually need to add your information update. So you do it here. But if you want, you can also take this and put it into your hub method as well. So it's actually just a matter of your preference. So when we look at so in my sample, what I've done is I've actually created a grid. This is my sample. So I was able to pull the information for the products, and I set up the SignalR in my data source, and I set the auto sync property to true. So this auto sync property is really a wrapper created by HaNoi for Play Control. So you can actually have the all your read write from the server client side will run automatically by your auto sync. Okay. So when we move down to the transport area, just need to take note of this with the promise and the hub. I know that some of you might not have used UI for ASP.NET MVC for Telerik before, but this is just one of the ways that I want to show you the sample, because in my experience, I've worked with a lot of different UI controls from different companies. Dev Express, Component App, Component One, even Logistics. And in my opinion, Telerik controls is actually the easiest to use. And compared to showing a sample in your standard quick view control in Visual Studio, I feel that it might not give you the sense of difference in terms of user experience. Okay, so basically the hub start and hub is where we specify the, okay, you can specify your product hub. So this is where you actually, from your connection, you know the class that you are referring to. So in SignalR, rather than, because your class is written in caps for your product, but here we are going to use camel. Okay, the hub start basically tells your hub to start listening. Okay, there's a limit to listen to the updates of the information from the clients. This is actually a very simple example that already worked. So at the end of this session, right, I will share all my source codes. I'll put it online so you guys can actually take a look at it. Okay, so if I were to launch a sample from here, you'll be able to see. So I'm going to duplicate. Okay, so so you can see that it's actually updated. If I were to change the information, so all this information, the create, update, delete, will be reflected immediately when you use SignalR. So SignalR, you can some of the use cases when you're working on an intranet application where you could have multiple users accessing your application at the same time. And sometimes you do not want people to create duplicate records. I would think from a user experience perspective, for example, how would I know that you are creating a new record right now when I'm not looking at your screen? So when you actually create a new record, when you add something, you can send the update to the server, and I'll be able to see the update as well. So I know that you're actually doing something.